obvious is to repeat it, but I think we got that. It's yes. And when we have won the next election, and let's be quite realistic about it, we may be talking about 2029. Because there are only two ways of getting rid of a government. The first is that the King or the Queen dismisses them. That's not going to happen. The only other way of getting rid of a government is if there is a vote of confidence which they lose in the House of Commons. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And with the size of their majority, it's a bit unrealistic to think that there can be an early general election. Now, I would like there to be, I want there to be, but the reality is that we'll probably be faced with another 3 years of chaos. And what matters is that we use that time. That we use that time to move on from the position we're in at the moment, which is that according to the polls, we will be the largest party in Parliament, to move on from that position to ensuring that we will be able to rule with an outright majority. Because we do not want, ladies and gentlemen, any alliance with the Conservative Party. And when the papers talk about unite the right, they forget that the Conservative Party is not right. It has an enormous, soggy, Lib Dem centre. That's what it is. We know from Lord Ashcroft's polls, for example, that 21% of Conservative voters, 21%, would actually prefer a Labour-Lib Dem coalition to a reform government. And that 53% of Conservative supporters actually prefer Starmer to Nigel Farage. Do we want to be allied with them? And the answer is no. Now, if by any chance after the next general election we only have a very, very slender majority, we can first of all do deals with the Ulster Unionists. But if we have to get beyond that, then what we need to do is to cherry pick the Conservatives that we ally with and make sure that we only do alliances with the genuine right of the Conservative Party, not with the Lib Dem element, which actually is pretty huge. So it's important that we can get an outright majority so that we don't have to do any of those alliances. And that means we've really got to use these 3 years. Now, some of that is down to HQ, it's getting the policies sorted out, it's getting the policies costed, it's making sure that we have got the right agenda to take into the general election. But an awful lot of it is nothing to do with HQ. It's about what you can do. It is about local activism. It's about distributing the leaflets, knocking on doors, taking part in radio phone-ins, writing to the local paper. I think we still have local papers that you can write to. Getting the message over on social media, whichever way suits you. Not everybody wants to do every single one of those things. But whichever way suits you, please spend the next 3 years doing it. I'm not saying give us 24/7. I'd like you to do that, but I'm not saying that. What I'm actually saying is just give us a set amount of time, if you can, every week from now until the general election is called, and you would be amazed at the difference that that will make. I mean, just look at the size of this meeting and how much would the other parties like to be able to do that? I can actually remember a time when the Conservative Party used to take this size of meeting for granted. Now it would be hard put to fill a telephone box. So we know where we're going from the size of the turnouts that we're getting, the size of the votes that we're getting. But to actually be able to deliver a reform agenda and to sort Britain out, we need to get into power. Now, what will we do when we sort that out? Well, I can't possibly cover every single thing tonight, but let's begin with one of the biggest, which is immigration. Now, you know, daily the small boats are arriving, and we have an answer. The first thing we shall do is, on the shore itself, we shall say to anybody entering this country from a small boat, terribly sorry, we're not even going to look at a claim for asylum because you have come from a safe country. You've come. Why don't they apply for asylum in France? I mean, they're there, they're safe, it's a signatory to all the conventions that Britain is a signatory to, so why don't they apply in France? And the answer for that is very straightforward, because this is the easiest country in the entire West in which to disappear. We don't have national identity cards. We do not practice routinely detention. We put people in hotels, in houses of multiple occupation. We put them wherever we can find the space, and they are free to come and go and live as free citizens. And therefore it's no very great surprise that when the time comes when we want to deport them, we don't know where they've gone, because we have a flourishing underground economy, and that is what they disappear into. So we need to reverse that message. So we've said to them, right from the outset, no claims for asylum will be considered. What do we do then? Well, we don't put them in hotels. We don't put them into houses of multiple occupation. What we actually do with them is what I advocated as long ago as 1999, when I was Shadow Home Secretary. What we actually do with them is to put them into secure reception centres. Secure, so that they can't come and go. And not only does that have the advantage of they can't come and go, which is the biggest advantage, but also their needs will be met. So they won't be able to claim the sort of benefits which they're claiming now. Those reception centres will supply the food, supply any required medical care, supply, obviously, the accommodation, and so there will be no need to fund them with money, with actual money. But the biggest advantage, even bigger than that, is that it will send a deterrent message. And the message will be, if you come to Britain with a false claim for asylum, and because you have come from a safe country, it will be false. If you come to Britain with a false claim for asylum, you will be refused, you will be detained, you will be deported.
And 20 years.
And who is going to pay £15,000 to a human trafficking agent for that? So we know what we have to do. Actually, successive governments have known it for a long time, but we are committed to it. Now, we can't do any of that unless we come out of ECHR. And the first thing we will do is put in hand coming out of ECHR. Now, for 14 years, the Tories said couldn't be done. Quite suddenly, Kemi Badenoch has decided that it can be done. And why has she decided that? Because people like that policy. People want to vote on the basis of that policy, and they've been driven into the real world. That ECHR is simply not compatible with control of immigration. Now that is unlawful immigration. There is also the control of lawful immigration. Now, let's face it, we are going to need to import labour for some time to come for the very simple reason that we haven't skilled our own workforce. We're going to have to do that. In care homes, in the NHS, we do actually need to import, and we have to face that. But what we can do is, first of all, alongside doing that, skill our own population. But secondly, set out very clearly the terms on which people come here. How long they can stay here before they can make a claim to stay permanently. The number of dependents they can or cannot bring. How soon, if at all, they can claim benefits. We can actually lay down the terms and control much more carefully perfectly legal immigration. I mean, the number of people who come here to study and then stay on. Well, if they come here to study, when the studies are done, they should go. So it can be done. Other countries do it. The only reason Britain doesn't do it is because we haven't got the will, while reform has the will. So that is immigration. Now, the second thing is taxation. We heard very eloquent explanation earlier from somebody who runs a business. He runs a pub. But it could be any sort of business. Because the first thing that this government did, despite the fact apparently Rachel Reeves is an economist, the first thing that this government did was to put up national insurance contributions for employers, and then on top of that to put up the minimum wage. And then they stand and look surprised when employers say, actually, we can't afford to employ. And that is one of the explanations, it's not the only one, but it's one of the explanations for the huge growth that there has been in youth unemployment. Now, everybody knows that if you make it unattractive for an employer to employ, he won't employ. He'll employ the minimum that he needs. He won't employ. And I learned that in the first week of my economics degree. I don't know what Rachel Reeves was doing. So we will, and we won't be able to do it by Tuesday afternoon. You know, we all saw what happened when Liz Truss tried to do too much too soon. But we will reduce taxes, and we will reduce business taxes across a parliament. That we are absolutely committed to do. And then the other big deal, and we heard about that tonight from one of your councillors, is crime. You know, successive governments have pretty well given up on crime. Now, it can be done, but what you can't have all over the country in one go is complete zero tolerance. Giuliani did it in New York. In order to achieve it, it's worth recognising that he put 11,000 extra police on the streets of New York. Now, you could put 11,000 on the streets of London, but if you're talking about London, Liverpool, Manchester, Cardiff, Edinburgh, anything else, if you're talking about that, then that is a very different proposition. So you've got to ask yourself a question. And you've got to say, where should we initially concentrate the zero tolerance? Well, I would propose that we do so with drugs. Drugs account for about 33% of all crime, that's a third of all crime, and 80% of acquisitive crime. And therefore, if you could make a real impact on drugs, you would make a disproportionate impact on reducing the crime rates. And so that is where you start. You don't end there, but that is where you start. And we know that increasingly now, not only Do the police just turn a blind eye when drugs are being traded, never mind just used, but traded? The police tend to turn a blind eye. We will reverse that, and we will make the war against drugs a central plank of our crime policy. So, and then you've got student loans. We can't just say, no more loans, we're going to pay for it. We can't do that for several reasons. The first is that Blair had a crazy policy of sending 50% of the population to university. 50% of the population should not go to university. And the result has been a huge expansion in Mickey Mouse degrees, universities that can't sustain themselves, and young people thoroughly fooled into believing that they've got a qualification, which is a serious qualification, and then find out that actually it isn't worth much and they've been saddled with an awful lot of debt. Now, what we can do is abolish the interest on student debt, because that's how it grows. And it doesn't matter, they pay back and then the interest comes on and they're in a worse position than they were in before. Everybody knows that's how interest works. We can afford to get rid of the interest on student debt. But it's got to go hand in hand with making sure that degrees are actually worth having. And if universities can't cope without either taking in huge quantities of overseas students or offering degrees to people who haven't even got any A-levels, and that happens. If universities can't cope without doing that, then frankly those universities should go to the wall. And then we have to look at the NHS. Now, our current policy is, first of all, that we have to look at recruitment. Because it doesn't help that the doctors are out on strike. But we have to look at recruitment. And one of the things that we have said, and that we went into the last general election saying, is that we will have a policy that if somebody qualifies in medicine or in an allied subject, and they stay in the NHS for 10 years, then we will wipe out their tuition debt completely. But they have got to stay in the NHS for 10 years. No messing at all, because that's the only way that we can actually recruit adequately. That is only one of the things we've said. We're still working a great deal on NHS policy, and there will be a lot of other announcements between now and the general election. Now, what else are we going to do? For a country to be truly sovereign, it needs to be self-sufficient in three things. The first is it must be adequately defended. Oh. We haven't got a navy left. No. Successive governments, Tory, Labour, coalition, all of them, have presided over a steady reduction in the armed forces, in the reserve, in the weaponry and equipment, in ships, in anything you care to mention. There has been a steady reduction. Because the attitude is, well, we're not likely to be at war, so that's where we can take the money from. We've got to reverse that, and we've got to make defence a major priority. And then the second thing that a truly sovereign nation needs, in order to feel secure, is it must be self-sufficient in energy. Yes. We can be self-sufficient in energy. We've got the North Sea. We've got fracking for that matter. We've got all manner of ways in which we could be self-sufficient in energy, instead of which we import energy in the name of net zero. And we will, as you know, we will abandon the target for net zero. It will no longer govern the sort of car you've got to buy, the sort of boiler you've got to install, all of which are vastly more expensive than the current ones. It will no longer interfere in the daily life of citizens, and it will no longer prevent this country from using its own energy resources. So that is the second thing in which we need to be self-sufficient. And the third, we need to be self-sufficient in the production of basic foods. Any farmers here? Now those are the guys we need to support. Instead of which we pay them not to produce food, to turn their fields over to solar panels, to set aside land which could actually be used for food production. We've got to have a completely different approach to agriculture in this country, and we will. Now, none of that is going to be done by Tuesday afternoon. We will come in, we will take over the reins of power, and then we will start thinking. But the thing that we can do very, very quickly is we can get some common sense back into this country. We can very, very quickly simply say to the public sector, the private sector will make its own decisions, we say to the public sector, there will no longer be any expenditure on diversity, inclusion. Equality actually means equality. Yes, it means that the woman is equal to the man, but it also means that the man is equal to the woman. Yes, of course. Blacks must be equal to whites. Gays must be equal to straights. But it also works in reverse. And positive discrimination will be abolished. And that, as I say, we can do quickly. Now, a lot of things involve changes to the law, involve what we're going to be doing with the House of Lords to make sure that we get our manifesto legislation through. A lot of things like that will be clogging up the first year, but there are things we can do right away. And one of them is to get rid of political correctness, positive discrimination, and just a total wokery that now paralyses this country. That can be done. So that is a very quick cant around the course. Now, please don't begin your questions by saying, you didn't mention such and such. No, I haven't had time to mention all such and such. I could only pick a few topics. But you can ask questions now on anything you like, and I've got a right clutch here. I'm going to go for the lady, but first of all I'm going to be disagreeable and say, I don't agree with you that we need more women. We just need more people of merit.
We want to try more women so she's got somebody to speak to.
Can you tell me what reform's plan is for the judiciary service? Because it's in disarray.
No, I can't tell you what reform's plan is for the judiciary because we haven't yet signed it off and formalised it. There are lots of areas like that. I mean, bear in mind we're a brand new party. The other parties come already with a huge volume of policy which they've had for donkey's years and which they just amend in the light of what's going on. We have had to start from scratch, so there will be areas where I can't tell you what we will do. What I can say is that we're very aware of that problem. We're aware of problems with the judiciary. We're aware of problems with the civil service. We're aware of quite a lot of problems. And they will be addressed, and we will have policy before we go into the election. That's all I can say now.
What year, month, day did you realise that you were no longer part of the Conservative Party?
April 2019. Now, what had happened was that I'd been a Conservative for 55 years by that time. Yeah, I'd started in the Young Conservatives when I was 16. And I had been a Conservative for some 55 years. However, I was thoroughly fed up with the fact that this nation had voted for Brexit, and the then Conservative government simply wasn't delivering. I mean, Theresa May. She was the Prime Minister at the time that I scuttled off to the Brexit party. I decided, and I can remember where I was now, I was by a Norwegian field, because I was on a cruise. And yet again, I forget the precise details, yet again, there had been shilly-shallying over Brexit, and I was standing there, and it was the field of Flam, and I was standing in Flam, and I drew out my mobile phone, and I rang a friendly journalist, and I said, "Do you have Nigel Farage's number?" And he said, "I do if we get the story first." And the rest is history.
Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. I like the shirt.
I believe I've got the correct attire.
You have.
I wanted to ask you, do you enjoy doing Dignify?
Do I enjoy doing?
Dignify.
Oh, have I got news for you? Have I got news for you? Yeah. I enjoyed the first one that I did. I hated the second. Now, the first one was very successful to such an extent they invited me back again. And at that point, only 2 women had been invited back, the other one being Emily Maitlis. So I did it again, and the second time I absolutely hated it. We had Jimmy Carr on the panel, he was endlessly vulgar, and I just decided, that's it, I'm not doing it again. I don't think they'd asked me to do it again, because it wasn't, that second one wasn't successful.
And can we do one last question? Okay.
The last question.
Oh, have you got more?
Yeah, indeed. Only 8:25.
So not the last question.
No.
The question is just to talk about inheritance tax.
Yes.
So the nil rate band on inheritance tax made by previous governments has not been increased for so long. It's
Yeah.
capturing people with 4-bed detached houses in parts of the country just because house prices have gone up. We know inheritance tax has been talked about by Nigel Farage in the original manifesto that came out with £90 billion worth of tax savings. Around about November last year, the party came out and sort of said, we're not going to be able to do that now because the debt isn't so good. Now, I saw that as Reform's first U-turn before they got into power, okay? But also what's happening that people don't seem to understand because the journalists don't get it is over since A-Day in pensions in 2006, when there's been a change in legislation, there's been a sticker to look after the historic situation that you were in, and then new rules come into play. Now, Rachel Reeves has changed legislation by using the word retrospective, by bringing pensions now into people's inheritance tax as from April 27.
I know.
That, in fact, is having a massive impact on what people did for the right reasons before. So is it generic that's dealing with that with pensions? And then have you got any information on who is dealing with pensions for reform and where the party actually sit with abolishing or amending inheritance tax, please?
Right. As you all know, in principle, we would like to abolish inheritance tax rather than merely try and shift the parameters. We'd like to abolish it. In practice, as I said earlier, we're going to have to balance everything that we want to do, and we're not going to be able to do everything immediately. That is something that I'm absolutely convinced we will do, but I would be lying to you if I said, well, it's going to be a top priority in the first budget, because I don't think it will be. I really don't think it will be. But we're very seized of the unfairness of it. And
Just to go back to one thing.
yeah,
I totally understand what you said, but the point where this woman has made that element retrospective.
I know.
If you get in within the first year and you just put
Sorry, we haven't got the mic. I'm so sorry. We've cut you a little bit short, but we are tight on time. So can I just go to the next question?
Can I answer?
Yes, of course. Can I get the microphone back?
Right, okay, let me just answer you on that one. We could do that, but again, you know, it's in this massive melting pot of all the things we could do, all the things we'd like to do, and what we can afford immediately. That is the question. It's not a question of U-turns, it's a question of stating clearly what we want to do, but we will from time to time have to amend the timetable over which we can do it. Nobody is saying that we think inheritance tax is a great thing, because we don't. But it's timetable and it's when we can do it. That is practical, and the one thing I do want reform to be is honest. And I want us to say, yes, we'd like to do that, we will do it, but maybe not, you know, just as we're all lining up to take the oath. I've got several questions going on over here, so let's
Right,
take
sorry, I've just got one. I've got quite a few questions, but just keep it to one really simple one. You said about reopening the North Field for the oil refineries because
Yeah.
they need to be taken back on power. But isn't it true that people don't actually realise that no matter how you produce our own oil, it's only actually charged at what the global currency will be? We don't have storage facilities to store it. We have wind farms now that are around the country that we have to turn off because we can't store it. We cannot actually dictate what we charge for energy. It's a global thing which dates back hundreds of years. So it's great opening it, but...
Sorry, I'm going to actually disagree with you.
Okay.
I'm going to say this. One thing that reform will not do is be governed by globalism. Hang on. The World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the UN half the time. We are not going to be told how to run our own country, what prices we set for anything at all. Those things will have to be determined by trade deals. And those things will have to be determined by the home market. And where there are problems, the duty of government, and I don't deny there are, the duty of government is to overcome those problems, not to say, we can't do it. That's been the problem for decades. The last person to say, we're going to do it, whatever the problems, was Margaret Thatcher.
I agree with everything you said about having the Navy, armed forces and concentrating on that part of the society. We've got a woke society. We've got children that do not understand history. We've got an unkind of educated group of people that are very woke. I think green policies are actually sane. What are you going to do to be able to support children, to be able to learn about these things that we've been putting forward, and most importantly, our young people?
Well, we've said for a long time that we will abolish wokery in the classroom. The point of education is to teach children how to think, not what to think. Boundaries have become completely muddled. And we will, and again, it's not something that's going to be done by the middle of next week, but we will completely alter the approach to the curriculum in schools. And we will do that. It can be done. We'll make sure, for example, that children do actually know the story of their nation, and that they know what happens, you know, after 1066.
I've got a concern and a question. So my concern is, over the next 3 years, what stops what I like to think is common sense policies being taken by other parties
Yeah.
What stops other parties taking these policies to enrich themselves? And that's a concern that I've got over the next 3 years. And my question is, it's a simple one that I probably missed. What is Reform's policy on the VAT threshold for increasing it? Have they had one? Have they mentioned one?
Sorry, the
VAT threshold.
The VAT threshold. Look, as far as taxes go, we have said we want to be competitive. Now, you've just asked me about VAT, but just let me mention one other thing. Almost the first thing that the Tory government did, not the Labour one, was to raise our corporation tax to the same level as France. Yeah. And then they watched in amazement while firms went off to the Irish Republic. Well, why did they go to the Irish Republic? Because the corporation tax was less there. And we've got to look at the whole tax thing, and that includes.
I think it starts with VAT, with small businesses.
I can't promise which way round we'll do it, because one of the big challenges to us will have to be to get businesses back into this country, to get brains back into this, to get, frankly, the wealthy back into this country. Because there's been a massive brain drain, there's been a big business drain, and there's been a huge wealth drain. And none of that is good for anybody. So, we're going to have to decide what we do first. And I'm not going to stand here and say it will definitely be VAT, because Nigel might say to me, why did you say that? I can only say that.
Can we get one last question?
You can get as many questions.
Hello, Anne. Okay. Right. Given that we leave the ECHR, right?
Yes.
Whilst you go through that process, would you call a state of emergency? Given the amount of Islamists on a terror list, why that would justify basically calling a state of emergency, and to hell with the ECHR, that would come later.
Well, no, the first thing we'll try and do is get rid of ECHR. A state of emergency is only declared when there is actually a pressing emergency. Yes, there is, but I don't know that it requires a state of emergency. There is a problem with fundamental Islam. There's no doubt about that at all. It's easy to stand up, make promises, to say we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do the other thing. When we have the responsibility of government, we have to keep in mind what we've said we'll do and what we want to do, and not just say yes, yes, yes to everything. I don't deny that there's an emergency, but there are other ways of dealing with it. Did you want to ask a question? Because you're pointing to other people asking questions. Okay.
Right.
Any more questions, everyone?
Yes.
Another 10 minutes.
Yeah, could we actually fund the sale and production of halal meat, because it is absolutely...
If you do it for halal, you're going to have to do kosher as well. And in the current state of anti-Semitism in this country, I don't particularly want to embark on that at this moment. Now, I say that as somebody who's passionate about animal welfare. Anybody knows that. I was one of only 8 Tory MPs who voted against hunting for it. I'm passionate about animal welfare, but I'm also looking at the state of our society at the moment and the position. You'll see I'm wearing the Star of David. The reason I'm doing that is because several of my Jewish friends told me that because they look very Jewish, they feel ill at ease in London, particularly when the demonstrations are on. Now, I can't conjure up Jewish features, but what I can do is wear a Jewish helmet. And it just isn't the moment, I think, to start trying to attack kosher. Okay, right, yes, there.
Could you tell us how you are actually involved at the moment with reform, with developing policies, etc.?
I'm called upon occasionally. I'm not any more a formal spokesman. That changed when we started to get more and more MPs, and that's reasonable. That we try to keep the spokesmanships within MPs. And because I live in Devon rather than London, I'm not in HQ every day of the week. So the answer is I'm less involved than I was when we were starting out and had no MPs and nothing at all. But I'm still consulted from time to time, and I certainly make an input from time to time.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got one for you, Anne.
There are about 5,000 people there. Yeah. Okay, who are we having?
Okay, Anne, I've got a microphone.
Oh, right.
Hello. We like our strong leaders, and you've obviously known Nigel Farage, and you've obviously known Margaret Thatcher. I wonder if you could give us a couple of anecdotes about either, or even both.
Yes, right. I think I will resist the temptation to give you any anecdotes about Nigel, because I think this is probably not the time to make a field by-election going on. And as for Margaret Thatcher, one of the things I say, and I use an example to demonstrate it, is that actually, I mean, God bless her, she was terrific, but she was quite remote amongst her MPs. And I always demonstrate this by describing how she and John Major used to come through the lobbies. Now, most of you know this already. Just for the few of you who won't know, the way that MPs vote in the Commons is that there are two long corridors either side of the chamber, one for eyes and one for nose. And you walk in one end of that corridor, you go through it, you come out the other, and at the point that you come out, there is a clock. And when you've given your name into the clock, you have voted. That's how it happens. Well, you have a quarter of an hour to get through the lobbies. And nobody hurries, because it's the one time of the day when the whole party is together. So if you want to buttonhole a minister or an opposition spokesman, or you want to find a fellow MP with whom you've got a matter of mutual interest, whatever it may be, you're standing in the lobbies looking round for the person that you're looking for. Nobody hurries through. When Mrs. Thatcher came through the lobbies, her PPS used to go in front of her, and it would be like the parting of the Red Sea. And then Moses came through and voted. When John Major came through the lobbies, I'm sure his PPS was there, but he never preceded him. And John used to go up to one person and say, great speech you made the other night. He'd go up to somebody else and say, thank you, that was a good question. Somebody else he'd say, is your wife better? Is she out of hospital? And even at the height of all the pressure on that beleaguered premiership, when our majority was down to very low single figures, we never knew if we were going to get our business through the House or not. We were riven apart over the Maastricht Treaty. We were beset by sleaze. You'd think any Prime Minister would just want to get through the lobbies. John never came through any other way. And I'll remember that for a long time. I know lots of people have got reservations about John Major, but I remember that. Okay, one there and then over there. Yeah.
Basically, you said that you're going to not be ruled by the WEF.
We won't be.
No, but they have an awful lot of influence over both Conservative at first, now Labour. It's obvious that Starmer is their puppet.
Yep.
And they are visiting number 10 and number 11 all the time. They are making all of their policies, and they're dictating it all. Number one, how will you be strong enough to fight against them? But number two, in Oxford, in August, they're starting 15-minute sittings, which they're hoping to do everywhere. We've got, we're being spied on everywhere now. How do you intend to change this?
Right, well, as far as the World Economic Forum goes, it's terribly simple. We just say to them, buzz off. Yes, they're powerful, but we can still say no. And that is what we must say, no. And we're not doing it that way. And in fact, the World Health Organization is even worse. And we say to them, no, we'll decide how we deal with the pandemic. We're not going to follow set rules. It really is simple. You assert your independence. That's what Brexit was about. It's about becoming a truly sovereign state. And this much I do hope. I don't know whether he'll take my advice or not. But when Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister, I hope that he will appoint one person in his cabinet whose sole responsibility is to oversee all the other departments with respect to maximising Brexit. I want us to use that first term of office to so embed Brexit that it will become genuinely irreversible. Anybody else?
Yes,
Yes, thank you for mentioning defence. You mentioned the amount of time that's been spent watching it in terms of decline. I have spent 3.5 decades until last month watching it in terms of decline. My question though is, so we're all saying, put defence first, yada yada yada, great, hear that. The mechanics of it though.
Yeah.
We take on more soldiers, we take on more airmen and women, we take on more sailors. Where are we physically going to put these people, having sold off so many barracks? Where are we going to train these people, having sold off so many training areas, and those, a number of those which are left are now basically, let's be honest, micro camps. So, you know, I've just watched troops unable to train very often at their chosen training area that they would like to go to because it fits what they want to achieve, unable to do so because they know where to put it. So, more money for defence, great. How are we going to buy back tens of thousands of acres of land to train people?
Right. That's a very good question. Nobody is saying that just because you spend the money, you get the immediate result. Nobody's saying that. And you're quite right, you know, a lot of land's gone, a lot of buildings have gone. Now, I was a naval daughter, and some of my childhood was spent in Gosport, and was spent, if you know anything about the Navy, in a place called Pretty's Heart. Well, that's no longer anything to do with the Navy. You know, so I mean, I've seen it firsthand and from my own life exactly how much reduction there has been. And yes, you will have to build up. You know, you won't be able to say on day one, we're going to be able to train all the troops in, you know, actually we've still got Salisbury planes, but one of the few things we have got. But you can't say, you know, we can train all the troops in such and such a barracks on day one. You won't be able to do that. But you will be able to build up. And that is the point at the moment. We're not starting on that. At the moment, this country is just not starting on repairing the rundown of our forces. And that is what we will do, and we will start. Now, I can't stand here now and list all the places that we might lose, but you can bet your last penny we'll be looking for them.
Yeah.
Well, this gentleman's been waiting for a yawn.
Thank you. I'd like to just draw people's attention to the fact that on your electric bill there's 8 green stealth taxes which equate to 28% of what you pay. Thank you.
Did it work? Yes, sorry. I'll repeat what I said. On your electric bill, there's 28% of it is 8 green stealth taxes. Now, I'm a big fan of the Severn barrage when it actually comes to power. If you look at the mass involved with it, the amount of electricity it can generate, combined with Hinkley Point 3 minutes up and running, that will supply power to Cornwall, Devon, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire and South Wales from 2 green power stations. Will reform back the building of the Severn barrage.
I haven't heard that we won't.
Excellent.
I said I haven't heard that we won't. I didn't say we won't full stop. I said I haven't heard that we won't.
Well,
and that's it's not a political answer, it's a straightforward statement of fact.
I've got a quick one for you.
Oh, right, okay.
It was sort you touched on it earlier on. They sort of stole my thunder a little bit. 2 questions, and you're not going to unzip your fly, to use the expression. Can you assure me that they are at least looking at this? When Reform get in, when Reform get in, they're going to have 2 major problems. One, the judiciary. Right, the judiciary think they run the country. No, the government run the country. They just make sure the law is upheld that the government states. Unfortunately, it seems to be the other way around. They think they set the rules and all the rest of the stuff. Okay, so that's one side of it. The other side, reform will get in. I read something in the paper the other day that even now the civil servants are already sorting their war chest out about how they are going to stand in your way to bring you down. How, and I hope the hell that reform are looking at, they need to go root and branch through the civil servants to rip out these mandarins, these traitors, take their pensions off them, take their knighthoods off them. People, they are civil servants. Their job is to serve.
Okay. Now, my father was a civil servant in the Admiralty, and in those days it was a very different approach. He, for example, could not even join his local Conservative association because that was a political statement. Everybody knew he was a Conservative, they all knew that in the Admiralty, including the Labour ministers. But he could not actually make a public statement. Somehow, and there are lots of reasons for it, not all just stemming from civil service recalcitrance, there are lots of reasons for it. Somehow we've now moved to a point where civil servants are much more politically active. Now we can stop that, but let me just say this. Don't run away with the idea that the whole civil service is wrong. It isn't. There are elements of it now which need curtailing, and we will do that. But it isn't completely rotten. And some of those mandarins do a good job, and some do not. So what I would say, and I say this as somebody who's worked with civil servants very closely, and in those days it was different. In those days they never showed partiality. You could guess, but it wasn't actually ever stated. What they didn't do was thwart the will of ministers. And we will have to make it quite clear to the head of the civil service that the duty of the civil service is and always has been to implement the will of ministers. And that is where you start. Then you can get rid of, the other thing we have to do is to get rid of all the wokery that's in the civil service. All the, the flags flying. We have to do all of that, and we will. But what I don't want to do is suggest that the whole civil service is rotten, because some of them are pretty darn conscientious. I must take this final one because it's my chauffeur.
There you go, yeah, so any coffees are welcome. The Forest of Dean branch has got like 700 members, and I think it's a similar number for the different branches around the county. Now that means, for business people, I understand that about 1% of the people are active for the branches, doing the work, going out and doing activism. And anybody who's got a business knows that, if you have 1% of the people doing 100% of the work, it's not going to happen. So my question to you is how we need to get all the voter intentions, because if we don't get the voter intentions, we don't get the votes out. 25% of our own membership didn't vote at the last election. That's our own membership. So my question to you is, how do you motivate people, and how do you tell them the importance to get them out to do this for us?
Right. Well, I said right at the beginning, if you remember, that activism is the key. I said that at the beginning. And I think motivation is simply, it comes from a situation being of such an order of magnitude that you feel compelled to do something about it. Now look at the numbers here tonight. This is an ordinary political meeting. And look at the numbers here tonight. Because people feel motivated. And what you've got to do is tap into people's motivation. Why did they... a lot of people became very disillusioned after the Brexit vote, because some people who never voted in their whole lives actually went out and voted. And then found that the government just tried to ignore it. A lot of people were disillusioned by that. So one of the things I think we've got to get over is, if you really want reform government, if you really want reform to do the things that it says it will do, then you've got to actually do something more than just put a cross on a ballot paper. Needn't be a huge excess of activity, but we need activity. All our supporters will not supply that. That is also true of the Conservatives, it's true of Labour, it's true of the Lib Dems. People who support you do not necessarily want to become terribly active. They've got their own jobs, their own businesses, their own families. But with enough people to be active, and just look at this now, we can do it. You'll never get everybody active. It's not possible.
And just one very last question from the
It's me.
campaign.
How many times have I heard that?
Seriously, this will be the last one, but this is our campaign manager for this evening.
The eye of Mordor is on me, trust me. And thanks for coming. It's been absolutely fantastic. I do have a question around the Greens, because I'm looking at strategies of how we might take Green votes. Being where we are in the Forest of Dean, it's really quite topical. And one of those areas is looking at where we are with, or where our future lies with fusion power outside of renewables. This isn't net zero, this is a brand new technology. So are you aware of where our current strategy is around fusion technology? Because I'd love to bake that into sort of like a broader message.
Well, what we have said, and I don't think we've specifically commented on that, but what we have said is, first of all, nuclear is the long-term future. Because it is clean, it is renewable, it is safe, actually, and it's totally reliable. So that will be the long-term future, but we've got to do all sorts between now and then. Think how long it takes to build a nuclear power station, I mean, for heaven's sake. So there's an awful lot that we've got to do. I cannot comment on what you've asked me, but I will ask the powers that be at HQ.
Thank you, Anne.
Great.